Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on the latest of our webinars. It's by far the best attended we've had to date, so I'm hoping you're all got some good questions for our panelists, and I hope really all of you and your families are well in the current circumstances. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes for me before we go to the panelists. One, it'd be great if you can use the question and answer session to raise questions. And we'll try to get through as many as we can today, but it's really important that we capture all of your questions so the transport strategy team can have a look at what they are, build them into the thinking around the transport strategy consultation, and where appropriate, get back to you on those questions if we've not managed to pick them up today. And secondly, we'd really like you to use the chat function. That's really important to get your comments and feedback and thoughts so we can capture as many of those as possible. It's a really important part of our consultation, the webinars, and it's the way that we're trying to reach out to as many people as we can in the consultation exercise that we're going through at the moment. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nigel Foster and I chair the Leeds City Council's Transport Advisory Panel, but I'm fortunate enough to have four really good panel members with me today. I have Paul Foster, who is the Transport Strategy Manager at Leeds City Council and responsible for the Connecting Leeds strategy. We also have Amanda Beresford, who's a partner at Schofield Sweeney and President of the Leeds Chamber of Commerce. We've also got Angela Barnacle, who's a Chief Officer for Asset Management and Regeneration at Leeds City Council. I'm sure a lot of you will know Angela and Amanda very well. And we've also got with us John Dales, who's a Director and Co-founder of Urban Movement. He's a member of the Leeds Transport Advisory Panel, and he's also a champion of better town and city streets. So we've got a great panel. I hope you got some good questions for them, but we'll have 5 minutes from each of our panel members just to start us off around some particular themes that we'd be interested in getting your views on. So I'd like to go over to Paul Foster, who will just give us a bit of background on how the transport strategy is being developed and some of the new solutions that we've been developing as part of that strategy. Paul.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. So we've been doing, as Nigel says, a series of these webinars. So I'm just going to do a quick recap, if you like. And those of you who've tuned into every one, you can maybe go and quickly get a cup of tea while I do this bit, because you'll have heard this before, but for those who are new to the session, just wanted to give a quick outline. So we've set about the transport strategy with a vision of a city where you don't need a car, and that's about making sure everyone has a low carbon, affordable and healthy alternative for every journey they make. And I stress the everybody and every journey, and that's what this strategy is trying to deliver. We've got three main reasons for doing this strategy and what it's trying to address, and they're not necessarily transport related. So tackling climate change, the City Council declared a climate emergency last year, and with an aim of being carbon neutral by 2030. So in transport terms, that's about reducing the amount we travel, the need to travel, things like Zoom we're doing now, remoding, changing the type of transport that we use from to lower forms of lower carbon transport, whether that be walking or cycling or public transport, and then finally decarbonising the rest of the fleet that would still remain on the network. So those essential vehicles, delivery vehicles, and for those people who need a car, looking at the low carbon electric hydrogen alternatives for that. In terms of inclusive growth, that's all about making sure that everyone has access to the work, leisure, and education opportunities that we have in the city, and making sure they're connected into them. Making a transport system that's efficient, that saves people time, that saves businesses time, and therefore moves the economy forward in the city. But also in terms of that, the more efficient system we have, you start to reduce the individual costs. So everyone's cost of travel should be reduced through the delivery of this strategy. And in terms of health and well-being, obviously the health benefits, both physical and mental, huge benefits that we can get through being more active in our transport, and then also the negative impacts transport has on our health in terms of the air quality, the air we breathe, and the effects that has on us, and also on terms of road safety. So they're the reasons why we've developed this strategy and what we're trying to achieve. Okay. One. So in terms of doing that, we've set ourselves some very ambitious targets in terms of, as I've said, the climate emergency, but also in terms of some mode splits, in terms of how we want to change those journeys from the private car to other forms of transport that set out there, reducing the distance travelled, and then a target to have zero people killed or seriously injured on Leeds roads. And to put that into context, previous years, obviously it's been slightly different in 2020, but previous years there was about 350 people killed or seriously injured on the roads in Leeds every year, and that's a number that's not acceptable. We need to look at how we can reduce that down to zero. Okay, Finn. So we've done within the strategy document that's all available on the website. You can watch the other webinars on each of the themes, and so I won't go into them. We've set ourselves these big moves, 6 themes that we're looking at, and today we're going to focus on the transforming the city centre, and I just want to give some quick examples of what we've already done in the city centre. So and what some examples of that. So the strategy sets out a few of our key aspirations. That's an example there of quite a small scheme relatively, but one that sort of demonstrates where we're going in terms of Greek Street, in terms of reducing what was a street and making that more accessible for people, changing the environment, helping the businesses that work on there, and transforming the city centre environment. Next one is, and this is work that we currently, and those of you who have been into the city centre recently will notice there is an awful lot of roadworks going on there and change happening. This is the hedgerow, so we're really reducing the dominance of the highway on the hedgerow, widening footways, putting in dedicated cycle facilities, and making it much more efficient for the buses that travel through there. We previously had issues with buses blocking other buses, and that just doesn't make sense, does it? So this new revised layout will really improve that flow of buses through the city as well. The next one, Finn. And then this is another one, aerial view of the work that's been done on Park Row. And again, people who've regularly walked up Park Row will recognise that, you know, that's a huge change in the way we've allocated that street space, narrowing down the carriageway width, still providing the bus waiting facilities, having dedicated cycle facilities, but hugely widening those footpaths as well for the high numbers of people that walk along there. So I think that's just an example of some of the things we've done there, and I'll now pass on to Amanda.
Good afternoon, everyone. My role today is to explain why the Chamber thinks that Leeds City Centre is important. And I think in order to explain that, it's useful to reflect on the role that Leeds plays. Leeds is a major UK and international hub for professional, financial and business services. It's been a centre for commercial activities for centuries. The Leeds economy is diverse, and as well as remaining a large centre for manufacturing and engineering, the city has seen strong growth in health, education and digital technology. These industries include major employers, and a large majority of them are based in Leeds city centre. And it's not by chance that these industries have developed over time in the city centre. It's the result of agglomeration, the clustering effect of knowledge, networks and economies of scale that have helped to drive the Leeds economy and in turn the wider city region. The success of these industries relies in part on the ability of firms to attract and retain talent. So the need for a large catchment area is vital in order to access skills, and access to these skills is boosted by great transport connectivity both in and beyond Leeds. Now, as a result of the last 12 months, we need to think about the effect of COVID on city centres. Prior to COVID, Leeds was on a strong upwards growth trajectory, dominated by growth in the city centre. And whilst COVID will undoubtedly change workplace practices, certainly in the short term, there will still remain demand for city centre activities. In 2020, the Chamber conducted research. We asked businesses about their future office requirements. The majority of firms, 68%, said they would need exactly the same amount of space as they had prior to COVID. 14% said they would probably need less space, but nearly 20% expected to increase their space requirements. They also indicated that their view was that face-to-face business would return to the city centre. Business services is a very people-centric business, and many Chamber members say they want to see a return to face-to-face contact and social interaction as restrictions begin to ease. COVID has clearly shown that for many in the business and professional services sectors, it is possible to work remotely. It is probable that remote working will remain a part of future working patterns. However, it isn't without challenges, and many of us have struggled to balance personal needs or the needs of family and children, especially during the latest lockdown, with the needs of employers. We hear at the Chamber from our members, and I know from my practice at Schofield Sweeney, that remote working creates issues. It's hard to develop staff in the same way. It's especially hard to develop more junior staff members. Informal mentoring and coaching and the sharing of firms' cultures and values amongst new starters is lost, as is the chance and overheard conversations and the innovation and collaboration both within and between organisations. Our ability to build and develop client relationships, whilst not impossible, is hampered by remote working. Most importantly, we've seen the increasing impact on well-being and mental health in the workplace from remote working. So I'm sure that many firms will want to get back to face-to-face working. I know many firms will be hoping that the vaccine rollout allows a return to some kind of normality, free of the start, stop, restart impositions by government. I know that many firms will acknowledge the challenges presented by climate change and the need to downgrade our reliance on the car if we are to address this. Leeds City Centre remains an attractive investment proposition now and into the future, and the Chamber welcomes these plans to improve our public transport network. It's our view that more sustainable travel modes and a better connected city centre will be good for business and benefit us all. So that's the end of my presentation. I think perhaps is it Angela next?
I think so too, Amanda. So should we go with that?
Yeah,
It is indeed.
I am notorious for having slides. So, and there they are. Thank you, Amanda and Paul. And I think that really sets the framework for just a few slides I'm going to share with you, where my role is about making sure that the city is greater than a sum of its parts, and certainly the city centre. And if I think about what Amanda and Paul have said, and particularly about the role of COVID, etc., and how our city centres will or will not come back, it always reminds me of Yangel's work and that importance of the spaces between buildings. And the one thing that the last, nearly 12 months have been for us all is very deliberate. And what we've lacked is that opportunity to bump into people, the opportunity for chance encounter, and the opportunity for innovation, that spontaneity. And that's why I'm a great believer that the role of city centres and district centres has never been more important. And when we went into, halfway through lockdown 1, we had an opportunity to step back and think about, were the plans that we were bringing forward still relevant? And we found ourselves in a position of saying, actually, they were even more relevant. We were increasing the width of footways. I mean, the drone image that Paul has, I'm hoping it's a drone image and he wasn't on the roof, that he's shown of Park Row is tremendous in, that is the one street where everybody has those chance encounters. And if I was walking to the train station or to catch the bus, I must have bumped into 3 or 4 people, but I would have shuffled down that road to be able to do with it, and not very safely. And what we've tried to do in terms of the asset management and regen team in the city centre is use transport as an absolute lever, as an opportunity with all the investment that was coming in to create more inclusive spaces that everyone could have that chance encounter. So I'm just going to show you a few of those as we move forward. And it all starts with the Our Spaces strategy, which is now some 4 years in the making. And this is Queen's Square, just opposite Merrion House, where we did a very simple landscaping treatment to make sure that our spaces were used more. And the Our Spaces strategy really set the framework for a number of green spaces that were being delivered in the city centre. And it's worth reminding ourselves that Leeds is 2/3 rural, but if you come into the city centre, you wouldn't think that through the tree coverage or just the communal spaces that we have to come together. And Queen's Gardens is a really, Queen's Square, sorry, I always call it Queen's Gardens, is a really a key example of just really simple interventions that can create much more community cohesion. And since then, there have been many others, such as Gateway Court, etc. And I want to show you a couple that are on site at the minute. Because working with our city centre management team, we've always tried to do this tactical urbanism where we've tried and trialled spaces first. And one of the spaces that we trialled was Cookridge Street. And given that it was so heavily dominated by vehicles, we tried pop-up parks by doing that really innovative thing about using AstroTurf and tables. And it was so well used, and it gave us the confidence that if we build the space, people will come and people will occupy it. And this isn't just for business. This is for, you know, the hotel that sits, the Radisson Blu, about people going to the Henry Moore Institute, people going to the City Museum. And you've seen what it's under construction. This is the CGI of how it will look, hopefully when we all start returning to the city centre. And then one of our next schemes that is a real gateway, certainly if you're from East Leeds, which is where I am from, is the Corn Exchange. And I have very fond memories of standing outside Leeds Market as a child and getting the bus back home to East Leeds. And a lot of the bus interchange facilities for this key gateway would have crowded this very beautiful and historic building for Leeds, which has really found a new purpose. And we've taken the opportunity that the Leeds Transport Improvement Plans have given us to create more space and a better setting for the Corn Exchange. And just so I don't create any confusion here, there is a cycleway that goes through this, and it is a dedicated route. And I've just used an old CGI, which Paul helpfully pointed out to me about 4 minutes ago. So don't worry, there is a cycle lane coming through there. And then if I just very briefly touch on a few other areas, is Leeds Station. We did some work recently where we did this thing where we scraped social media, and we found out what people were saying and weren't saying about Leeds Station. And then we also analysed a huge volume of digital traffic that was going throughout the city centre. And we found out that the busiest street within Leeds is actually Platform 8. There are 34 million people in an ordinary year that would use Leeds Station. And it's an absolutely key pivotal point for connectivity, not just for Leeds. I think 70% of people who use Leeds Station are actually beyond the Leeds City Council boundary. So it's a huge regional and national piece of infrastructure. And this is what it looked like about 2 years ago. And we created the Integrated Station Master Plan so that we could transform Leeds Station, not in 15 years' time, but to have incremental change as we go through. This is now what it looks like. And I'm hoping that the next few slides will show you the scheme that's about to go on site, which will deliver 700 cycle storage facility in the dark arches, as well as giving you that safe entrance and exit out of the station, and a much more integrated transport exchange into taxis, into people walking, into people cycling. And then the next slide, Finn. This really just demonstrates, if we're looking up New Station Street here, these are my two favourite independent retailers are up this street. And again, the setting that they have for the volume of pedestrian movements that are going up this street is not fit for purpose. And the current phase of the Leeds Station Improvement Plan allows us to really pedestrianise this street, and it allows us to create a much better setting for that 34 million people who are using that station. And then very quickly, I will touch on the South Bank. But before I do, I'll tell you about City Square. The Leeds Passenger Transport Improvement Plan gives us a key opportunity to remodel City Square, and it's something that I remember being at school. People talked about how we were going to close City Square to traffic, and we're now, kind of months away from doing this, which gives us a huge opportunity to create a space which is larger than Trafalgar Square. And again, this is about bringing people together and having a much more welcoming and accessible city centre. We are literally out at a REBA competition for a design partner at the minute as well for this one. And very, very briefly, I will just touch on the South Bank, because one of the key important things about the station master plan, certainly when we look to long-term significant infrastructure investments such as HS2, which always have uncertainty around them, is making sure that the city was not working, the city isn't waiting for something to come in the 2030s. It actually can keep on delivering now. And we created the South Bank framework so that actually life could go on ahead of and around HS2's arrival. And one of the key important things about that is the city park, which is 3.5 hectares of green space in the city centre, the first phase of which will be on site this year. And Finn, if you go forward to the next slides, that's an artist illustration of the City Park, which is now named Air Park, and the transport connections and the new bridge that we are putting in over, there you are, for the next, he's already ahead of me, and the new bridge that we're putting over in between Asda into Sovereign Square, which creates that pedestrian and cycling movement. I think that's probably, there is another image of City Square, that's probably a very whistle-stop tour in longer than 5 minutes on the huge volume of work we've been doing over the last 4 years, really.
That's great, Angela. Thank you. I mean, there's some very relevant questions that are coming in the chat. So I think you'll be back on trying to resolve some of those for us shortly. But first of all, let me go to John Dales, because John's worked in various cities around the UK and overseas, and it'd be really good to get what John's views of how Leeds compares with other places and some of the successes that he's seen elsewhere. So over to you, John.
Thanks, Nigel. Yes. Yeah. All right. I'll get on there. Hello there. I'm focused on trying to talk. I was given the brief of talking about transforming the city centre, but also looking at what we've learned recently from COVID, but also from other places. But it's always fascinating having to do a presentation when you don't know what the people before you were going to say, and then thinking, oh, all right, well, they've already said that, or it reminds me of something. So I'll try and keep to time. But actually, there were a couple of things, especially Angela touched on, that I'd like to pick up as we go along. And just to be clear that this session is about the city centre, and there's so much more to Leeds. But that's what we're talking about at the moment. So trying to think about the things that specifically affect the centre. If you could just move on, Finn, that would be great. It's interesting. So one of the things when you consider something like the city centre, or to be honest, any given area, which is, what are we talking about? What do we mean? What does this city centre mean to you, to the people of Leeds, to different people in Leeds? I know it's one of the comments in the chat. It's about, well, it means different things to different people. If I work here and then go away, it means a different thing if I live here and I'm of a certain age or of a different age. I'll go to different parts. If I shop a lot here, but I just meet my mates here. If I predominantly come in to and from the station, but then I just go home or to wherever else I'm going. So this picture might be the city centre. On the other hand, next slide, this also, that's the station at the bottom, the header at the top. This might also be the city centre, which is considerably more, and obviously brings in the South Bank, which when I lived in Leeds, which is that yellow dot on the campus of the university, and between, and it was a long time ago now, a terrifyingly long time ago, bearing in mind my son now is at University of Leeds up in one of the Brunels in Hyde Park. So what does the city centre mean? Maybe it's all of that. Well, I live on the edge of it there. The South Bank didn't exist in my day, essentially as a place you would go. You just felt that the railway line and the river and there'd be dragons. There's obviously more to it than that. But equally, if you take the next slide, and especially bearing in mind what Angela was just saying, thanks Finn, about the city square. One of the things that I find interesting is this particular picture. I remember looking at years ago, long since I'd last been to Leeds, and thought, what are those funny red lines? And you realise, oh, that's a cycling scheme as we used to do them, and you know, it achieves something. But what you can see is, especially in the context of when we have this vision of trying to enable everybody to be in the city without having to own a car, in terms of what we might do to enable it them to think actually cycling's a pretty decent option. Having little bits of strips that cling onto the edge of a load of tarmac, you have to cross a lot. Look how many crossing points you'd have to make if you were trying to cycle between the station and Park Row, for example. And if you've been there, you'll know there are quite a lot of conflict points with pedestrians. So it's great to know that that's being transformed. But it's a good example because that's not that old of what we tried to do. And I think one of the things we're learning is that if we really want to change people's travel habits, we really have to think, well, what will actually make them change, rather than what bits can we do that seem like the right kind of thing. Someone I saw in the chat earlier was talking about cycle mode share targets, and you kind of think we can have targets, but the key thing is to focus on actually what is it that will make people change and actually start cycling when they currently do something else. Let's say if they currently cycle short distances, drive short distances. Next, please, Finn. So at the heart of all this is this vision. I don't think we can lose sight of this, and it's extremely important, because the thing is, once vision statements are not everybody's cup of tea, they sound very similar. I have to say I haven't seen one like this for a city, and I'm delighted that Leeds have picked on this one. But actually, so it's this idea of you don't need to own a car. It's not that you can't, you see, you don't need to. So what is it we're going to do? Because that's a really high ambition. And we can't achieve it. We haven't a hope of achieving unless we're prepared to take some difficult decisions and keep that vision in mind, rather than just kind of giving up. And I'll come on to that in a minute. Next slide, please, Finn. So just a few thoughts specifically about transport in city centres that don't necessarily apply anywhere else. And I know the challenges elsewhere are perhaps greater in different ways, but we are talking about the city centre, which is, in city centres on the whole, people have got more options for how they move around. It's relatively easy to walk from one place to another, possibly to cycle from one place to another. There tends to be, because of the concentrating effect, more buses around. Obviously, the station's there, so you can get in and out in that way. You can pick up a taxi, possibly pick up one of these days a hire bike and that kind of thing. Goods, however, and this is something that's so easy to forget, the movement of goods doesn't generally have more options in city centre, and deliveries, access to businesses, all that stuff that's a pain in the neck when you're walking around or cycling around, but actually needs to happen, because otherwise the places you're going to and shopping in, there ain't anything on the shelves or anything they can serve you on your tables. You know, the things we go there for, that's a real challenge. They don't have options, but I put the although because I think there are new ways of thinking about how we move freight in city centres that do apply more to city centres than elsewhere. Obviously, the issue is that spaces are a premium. What comes with all that is everybody's coming in, and it's a real challenge. And actually, that is a real difficulty. And actually, I often find when I'm talking about things like this, that I'm thinking, well, I'm not making this any easier for you, but that we have to embrace and recognise the complexity. And what we're trying to do is within a strictly constrained space, because actually creating more space is really difficult, because land is really expensive. And so nobody's going to say, I'll tell you what, yeah, we can knock that building down and just create space, you know, just widen the streets somehow, you know, with really expensive buildings along the side that we, the public authorities, don't own. So that puts another challenge into us. And I think one of the key things about city centres especially, and this relates to it could happen in any local centre, but especially it's intense in city centres, and again relates to some of the comments we've had, which is, who are city centres for? They're for everyone. We let everybody use our streets, which is a wonderful challenge, but a real challenge at the same time. So the young, the old, people who've got money to spend, people who don't, people who are there for a specific purpose, people who are there just to see what gives. And they need space. They want space to sit, but they don't have to pay to have to sit in that space. They want space to play in some respects. They want spaces when they can also sit and pay to have a coffee or a bite to eat or whatever it might be. And of course, in the city centre, there's also the issue about the fact this is for better or for worse. I know this is a challenge for some people. It's just an idea of it communicates an image of the city, which is good for people, but also good for inward investment, and it's a place that people notice a lot. And so how it looks is perhaps more important, even more important than other places. Next slide, please. And just quickly breezing through this one. So what I'm saying is the city centres are really complex places. We need to think quite quickly. This is a slide that actually I was given, but I don't think, I can't, to be honest, maybe I wasn't looking. I'm a bad person. You know, it's just showing how complex the city centre is. We want to be welcoming, a cultural city, legible, accessible, business friendly. It's growing, right? There are these 8 separate aspirations. So it's quite challenging, which brings us to the next slide, please, Finn, which is, you know, that we need to embrace the inherent complexity, but it means a number of things. And it means that we can't just do one thing. I would say that probably any street or city centre you walk through, if you're unhappy about it, is almost certainly the core of the problem there is that somebody did a thing once upon a time without thinking about all the other things. And so we need to really focus on, like that thing I showed you, that aerial view of the old existing city square, which is, we did a cycling thing. You know, wasn't that great a thing? And also it made it difficult to walk and move around and everything else. But that's just one example. And there are lots of different ways. If you go quite binary, just pedestrianize this street, or just make this street bus priority, or just cycling, or whatever, we need to think about that. Accordingly, also flexibility and adaptability are really key considerations, and something I'd like to pick up from what Angela was saying before, which comes into the next one as well, is, and actually the bullet point after this, trial schemes are really, really helpful and important. See if it works. We don't have enough money and we don't have enough time just to spend a lot of money on stuff that a couple of weeks later, 6 months later, we might wish, oh, hang on, that didn't work. So we need to really think hard about investment decisions that will hardwire new spatial priorities. It's helps to basically reassigning space for good, so to speak, to one use or another use or a different user. We really need to think hard about that. It's not that we shouldn't do it, because something like City Square, for example, you don't want there to be a bunch of cones and, you know, plastic chairs forever kind of thing. I'm not saying that's going to be that at all, but actually we really do need to think hard about those. And actually, if we can learn from trials before we do stuff like that, that would be great. And that's one of the things we've had the opportunity, albeit unintendedly, to do from COVID. We should also, and this has been pushed forward, I think, by the pandemic as well, is to pursue innovation and embrace technology. You know, there are lots of things going on. We should try stuff out. There are lots of opportunities, lots of things we'll be able to do in terms of movement, whether that's shared mobility. I've seen a question about that. How can I live? I might want to use a car. I don't necessarily want to have to own a car. So what are my shared mobility options in terms of card clubs, you know, cycle hire, scooter hire, even all that sort of stuff. And also, therefore, well, why wouldn't you learn from elsewhere, see what others have done? But in the heart of all this, I just keep coming back to this vision, which is the vision remains the vision. So because all of those bullet points above imply challenges and real issues, and in the past, we've often just sort of given up too hard. So we need to make sure that we keep holding to that vision. We have to work out a way, ultimately. So just a couple of slides of pictures to go with, to finish with. The first one is just some stuff from the kind of things we've seen during COVID that I've come across. Top left is really just a really obvious, golly, how not to do it. Well intentioned, let's throw some Lego bricks out there in front of a bus stop and sort of dob in a ramp, if you can see that. I have no idea, this is not far from where I live, no idea what they were thinking of, but it was well intentioned. On the other hand, top right, what you've got is a temporary cycle lane, and maybe not temporary, that could be there for a long time because they're fixed, they're permanent. They're not terribly wide cycle lanes, but they are wide enough. And when I was cycling along behind this woman with a trike, with a child in front, when I needed to overtake, I looked and could go through one of the gaps. So it's temporary, but actually that could be long term. It's also really cheap. Bottom left is an example which looks like it could have been a cycle lane because of those black and white ones that are sticking out, but actually that was just a way of grabbing space for walking, for pedestrians, essentially widening the footway at a really busy crossing point. And this is quite near London Bridge Station, so it really was quite busy still. And that idea of actually we can also grab space for walking and just being in a temporary way as well, and seeing if that works. And then finally, just at the bottom right, that's just an example. That's just an example. Yes, I've just seen a comment. It is a shame about that car straight ahead of the trike. That's as far as they've got their traffic lanes at the moment, cycle lanes at the moment. But the bus stop, the temporary bus stop, which is pushed out into the old bus stop, it's just for me as well an example of something that somebody else has mentioned, that within city centres, especially big city centres, we do still need to think really hard about how we enable people to move by bus and by public transport. And if we got a sense of priorities, that means if we want the footways to be better used, we also need to make sure people aren't also just crowding on the footways while they're waiting for buses. So to give more space for that is an important issue as well. And that's that whole issue of trying to think of everything at the same time, so that when we're using our spatial, making our spatial decisions, we've thought about the effect of one intervention on another. My final slide is just this one, some thoughts from other cities. And top left is the sort of the before and after. It's hard to see, I know, but that's basically top left is a couple of parking bays in Dublin city centre, where every morning a UPS truck rolls up, and then the second picture underneath is where the UPS truck rolls away and just leaves us basically this container where a couple of electric powered cargo trucks come along and then spend the whole day redistributing that stuff within the city centre. As I was talking about with goods and movement, we do have some options. So let's turn a couple of parking bays over to essentially a little transshipment bay where one truck can come in just the once early in the morning, and then these little electric powered trucks can move it during the day. On the right hand side, we've got the new station. 2 photographs, the top 2 are from a new station in Copenhagen, and just look at the challenge of all that cycle parking. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, and it's great that at the city station in Leeds, we're thinking of a different way of doing that, although it's cheap and the demand is such that actually you can't always create underground space or whatever. The other pictures is beneath that, all the cycles, is just the other side of the station. It's just an example as well of how we need to use our public space, especially where there are gathering spaces, for people just to be. And you know, it's not a particularly exciting photograph, but it's just a reminder that actually that public space for people just being, you'll notice you can just sit there. Some of them are related to cafes, others are just open seating. Bottom right is actually a little thing I saw in Paris. One of the things we know is this sort of new mobility is with us, but what do we do about that? Lots of understandable complaints about scooters in the wrong place, that and the other. In Paris, they've started to turn over some of their ordinary parking bays, car parking bays, to scooter parking bays. And that's not a bad thing. And we need to think about the actual implications of these things and make provision. And then just bottom left is a city street in Vienna, which I've used because it's a beautiful street to be in. You can see from the car immediate legitimate access by motor vehicle is still allowed, but it's also beautifully treed. It's a wonderful place to be. There is private seating, there is for restaurants, there is public seating. It's easy to walk, it's easy to cycle. It's one of those streets where the balance is just right. And that, again, that idea of thinking about everything in order to get the best solution when you're doing permanent investment decisions like we've done there. Sorry, I've overrun, but I'm done there. Just let the final slide, let's leave the vision, let's leave you with the vision. Thanks very much.
That's great, John, and thanks for sending us with some inspirational and picking up some of the detail points which have come up from the Q&A. There are a lot of questions in the Q&A. We're not going to be able to get through all of them. Can I just remind participants that for those who are raising questions about buses and mass transit, on Thursday afternoon we have a session on mass transit specifically, and on the 10th of March we have a session on improving public transport in Leeds. So if I don't get to those questions in the chat, we will certainly pick them up. And we'll also try and get them raised at those specific webinars later on. What I'd really like to go to, and you picked upon it a couple of times, John, but I'd like to get Angela and Amanda's view on this, because it's been raised by a few people in the chat that do you need to spend money in the city centre? I think you picked up on it about private and public seating. There was a comment that there's no images of non-paid seating. I'm pretty certain I saw non-paid seating as well as restaurant seating in your images, Angela. So can you just pick up on that? Because I'm very passionate about this being an inclusive city, and a lot of the strategy is taking away some of the dominance of roads with car traffic in them and vehicles in them, and giving them over to people, which is a long history in Leeds of being at the forefront of creating streets for people. What's your thoughts, Angela or Amanda, on that? Angela?
Do you want me to go first? Absolutely. I mean, the whole premise of the Our Spaces strategy was about creating an inclusive city centre, and the very first principle was about people first. Certainly in the images that I've shown you, there isn't well, certainly Cookridge Street, Corn Exchange, there's all seated around people perching and dwelling and being able to spend time in the city centre. And one of my colleagues who works much more closely on Ayr Park, the city park, calls it a park where it's jumpers for goalposts. As in, this is about a very informal place where people can come. So I'm very passionate about making sure that we are creating a city centre where people don't feel like they have to come and spend money. And I mean, certainly with 2 young children myself, you want to be able to create a city centre where people can come. I mean, we have fabulous museums in Leeds, which are all, you know, certainly the city council ones are all open entry. And we want people to be able to come and not just spend place inside, but to spend time outside as well, which was the whole premise of certainly going first with Queen Square and having a very informal landscaping treatment, which was about people feeling that they had a much more welcoming space.
Yeah,
I'm sure that
Angela, Amanda, sorry, do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm sure that from what I've seen, there will be plenty of opportunities for people to come to the city centre and enjoy the parks, the museums. No doubt there'll be street entertainment, which you can or cannot contribute money towards. So there'll be lots of opportunities, I'm sure, to have a day in the centre without spending any money. But there will also, if we have a vibrant city centre, be plenty of small and other businesses who will be able to provide a service, whether it's a lunch or a sandwich or something which contributes to the vibrancy of the city centre at all cost levels. So I think everyone should have a chance.
Yeah, and I think there was a follow-up question about there only being stone seating for non-paying, and I saw grass spaces, hard spaces, stone seating. There's all sorts of seating, I think, in Leeds, you know, conventional or traditional wooden benches. I think, you know, my experience, but we know we're good to have the feedback, and someone has asked the question, you know, is it only through these webinar consultations? No, there's all sorts of consultation exercises going on, some of them online, obviously because of the circumstances we're in, but we want everyone's views, and, you know, they're all important. So, you know, it isn't just for today, it's all the different methods that we're employing, and Finn can email around or make sure that we circulate what those are, so panelists, so the participants can get an opportunity to comment. I'd quite like to go to one of the questions, which is about creating more than the city centre. I think that's really important. It's come up in a number of the webinars. John, you touched upon it's not just a city centre, and how do you define it? I know this is passionate for you at the Chamber, Amanda. John, what's your thoughts about it being just a city centre that we're looking at, or is it a strategy that should apply more widely?
Well, I think it has to apply more widely in a way. I mean, firstly, there's probably some planning designation for the city centre. You can put a red line around that. But I think one of the things about red lines in cities generally, that doesn't mean anything to anybody. You know, at the me level, which is I live here and I want to go there. There's obviously one of the things that's like, so just a slight anecdote, but it's a kind of interesting one. I mentioned my son lives in Leeds at the moment. My daughter, my eldest daughter, used to live in central London as well, and she doesn't. She moved back, and she moved back home with us because where she was paying a lot of money in order to be near where she worked, which was in the city, near the city centre, in order to be near the city centre, because that's where she wanted to be, and all the things that do congregate there. And because of COVID, none of that's happening. So she thought, well, I'll save my money. But I suppose for me, that's just a good example of the fact that people want to be close to the city centre. And as I said, when I lived up in, near Woodhouse Moor, I felt, I don't know, it's my city centre. It's just a 10, 15-minute walk. My son, who lives that bit further away now, probably, because the other side of the moor, on that side, it feels that little bit further. But actually, we all define, in a sense, our own geographies. And I think, therefore, it's what does the city centre mean to you is very important to me, that is to say, to each of us as individuals. And we need to be thinking about what it is that city centres mean to different people in terms of how we think about what we do there, but almost how we define it as well. You know, this street, that's not in, that's not, but actually that's important to me. The South Bank is more important to me, again, speaking as a theoretical individual, than anything else. And so I think it's about the kind of things we expect in city centres. I mean, just, you know, obviously this particular session is about what we might do towards the centre, but I wouldn't ever think that we will or won't do something here or there simply because it's be one side of an artificial boundary. And one of the things that the city centre has shown, my early slides show, which is, I think, what you would call the city centre now is plainly a bigger area than it used to be when I lived there in the early 80s. You know, oh, I've said it now. But, you know, and we need to be bearing that in mind. I suppose it comes back to the point I was saying about flexibility in every term, which is the one thing that's sure is the thing that we're sure about this year, we probably won't be so sure about next year. Change is happening, the way things expand. And just a quick one, I'm obviously, Leeds has got this with its, you know, probably perceptually one of the northern boundaries to the city centre is the motorway. Well, that was the problem with building that kind of highway infrastructure. You know, and the river was a southern boundary. Well, we've come over the river now, and there's that sense that that boundary is disappearing. The moment we try to put in fixed boundaries, physical boundaries, as well as perceptual ones, you know, they're going to get challenged straight away. We're going to wish, oh, I wish we'd set that a little bit further north or east or west or whatever. So we need to be quite flexible in terms of how we think about this. Otherwise, we just all accidentally rule stuff out.
Great, thanks, John. And Angela, I know from, you know, the work with the Inclusive Growth Partnership that, you know, we're very committed in Leeds to making sure that we reach out to all parts of the city, all parts of the district that you know, the council is responsible for, and that means other city centres and town centres more widely. You know, whether it's Wetherby or Pudsey or Armley or Crossgates or wherever in the city. And how do you see, you know, this working? This is about transforming the city centre, but we know it isn't just about the city centre, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm pleased you've asked, because we've got an extensive survey underway at the minute about how people are going to be using not just the city centre, but their district centres moving forward. And I can get Finn to pop a link in, or I'll do it in the chat box in the minute, that it's open till about the 26th of March. Because what we do know is that we're not going back to 2019. And we know that COVID has forever changed how we're using places. And I think that is at the advantage of local centres. I certainly know for where I live, I've used my local centre a lot more than I perhaps would have done had I been travelling into the city centre. But I also know for some parts of my job, it'll still be really important that I go into the city centre. So I think we're probably going to have a much more distributed advantage to local and to future and to the city centre. And each one has its own place, doesn't it? And it's interesting the amount of people that will, I suppose, hypothecate about the death of the city centre, etc. And I think the one thing that we've known from centuries of, I suppose, anthropology is that people want to be with other people, and the city centres and the district centres will have their role in doing that, but they won't just be for one purpose, they will be for multiple purposes. So I suspect when people go back into their city centre, they won't just go for work, they'll go because they're going to meet friends up, it'll be much more deliberate and probably stay in longer. And I think that's the same for district centres. And certainly as we think about where our own workforce is going to be, we are trying to give our workforce a lot more opportunity to stay local at the same time as having the ability to come in as well. But I'll copy that link into the chat box now, because we really need to hear from everybody on this call and beyond.
You know, that's a great answer, Angela. And I think I just want to follow it up to Paul, if possible, because there's a number of questions about, you know, is this consultation genuinely reaching out to people? What's the methods? You know, there are people who have said in the chat that, you know, their colleagues or partners aren't aware of it. You know, so how are we going to reach out to everybody, Paul? That's one question. And then a more technical question is, and I think it's a good one. I think maybe something that you and Angela could respond on, and that is, if we're closing City Square, shouldn't we be finishing off the loop first? What does the sequencing look like? Should we be moving the current loop to our wider plans, and how are we going to do that? And indeed, there is a question that says, should we be doing City Square in the current in the current sort of economic climate? Are there other things that we could be spending our money on? So Paul, what's your thoughts on the strategy? Because I know it's intended to connect to health and well-being, to child-friendly Leeds, to inclusive growth. It's not a transport strategy for itself. It's there to enable other things to happen. But you.
Yeah, so thanks, Nigel. I mean, as I outlined at the beginning, there is those key drivers for why we're doing the transport strategy, how we're reaching out to wider groups. Clearly, with COVID, it's not as easy. We are having to use online methods more than we would like to, but we are going to the virtual community committees across the district, so engaging with your local councillors on those. They're all viewable. We get questions through them. We're working with the team in Leeds Involving People, who specialise in going out to some of the seldom heard groups across the city, making sure that we are reaching all those different areas. We're engaging with the youth council as well to get the young people's views, with the accessibility user groups and people like that, to make sure that we are getting that cross section. We're doing targeted online advertising to ensure that we get responses from all the areas, and there's certain areas of the city that we know don't traditionally respond in the same level, so we're trying to target those areas and do some paid advertising to ensure that we do get the views from everyone. So there's a real effort going into ensuring that we get the views across the city. It's great that people are on this one, and I think it is difficult, this one. The criticism of this being all about the city centre is that is the topic for today, but if you read the rest of the strategy, it's only a sixth of the big moves. The rest are very much focused on how we deliver for the rest of the city. It's just the city centre, as other colleagues on this call have sort of highlighted, that importance of the city centre and its role in West Yorkshire and nationally, and how it draws people in, and what is already there, what the assets are that are there, and what will continue to be there. It's a heartbeat of the city, and we're just making sure that we have adequately addressed what we need to do there through that. So the technical bit on City Square, should we close it now? Should we not? So the inner ring road, as John mentioned, is actually, while it's probably, if you started again, you wouldn't build something like that. It's very much a legacy of the motorway city of the 70s. But what it does do is gives us the opportunity to focus the traffic that will remain and is likely to remain in the short medium term onto those routes. So take it out of the city centre, which does allow the opportunities that we've shown here to be delivered. So we're looking at that with COVID and the reduction in traffic flows that we've had, the increased working from home that was likely to be an effect going on forward, that change in mode to active modes, etc. We think we can close City Square now. So we've done the assessments on what that means. We can close City Square, and we're working on improvements at Armley Gyratory that will then sort of accommodate that traffic redisbursement around the city. So it's about focusing that around the city, so we can do these improvements inside the city.
Angela, you want to add anything to that? Or?
Was there anything specific you want me to draw out?
Well, I just think I think you're saying we're going to move the road to accommodate the city square, but should we be still doing City Square at this point in time, or is it fundamental to our plans?
I think there's quite a lot in that. I mean, first of all, what we're making sure here is we are taking City Square to a stage of design which allows us to do the other things in the city centre. It's not about actually implementing the scheme just yet, because we'd obviously want to hear everybody's views, etc. So it's about what's the design concept that allows all the other moves to happen, that allows us to still bring forward City Square as a piece of beautiful public, well-used space. And then it's about then, how do we fund and deliver that? And there will be multiple routes that will come up. And certainly what we need to have is the opportunity to bid for funding streams as they come up. So the whole purpose of the City Square piece at the minute is to make sure we don't preclude anything in the future, but actually we've got a scheme that can go through design development.
Thanks, Angela. That's really good. One of the other questions that have come up, strongly, I think you've touched upon it, John, and Amanda, you've touched upon it, is creating a city centre that's great for walking and cycling, that you can move around easily, that encourages businesses to locate there, for people to visit it and spend time there, whether they're paying for food and drink, or whether they're visiting shops, or just wanting to, as Angela said, play in the city centre and spend time and relax. How do you see that from a chamber point of view? Because you're also involved in the Chamber's planning committee, and you've been part of the property forum as well. Amanda, how do you see that as being critical to the future of the city?
Our members feel that the quality of open spaces within the city are critically important to their business. Businesses have a much better chance of success. They'll have better footfall. People will feel happier. People will come more frequently if the quality of spaces around their businesses are good. So it's really important to the Chamber members, and we have actually got a subgroup who engages with the council on the quality of public open spaces to help ensure that those spaces are of the standard and quality that they need to be for a successful city, and therefore successful businesses, which is our membership.
That's great. And John, your examples all show it as the heart of a vibrant city, creating those sort of places that are easy for people to carry out whatever they want to do in the city centre, in terms of business or leisure.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we experience cities for the most part on foot, and however we get there, when we're there, we get out. I mean, if we think about the commerce thing, not that you don't have too much drive-through in the city centre, just as well, in my opinion. Whether you arrive by train, whether you walked all the way, perhaps cycled in or whatever, once you're there, you want to be able to move around freely. And I think one of the things that's often said about, what the challenge of out-of-town shopping centres, everyone seems to think that the only benefit of out-of-town shopping centres is has free parking. And you think, I wonder if it's that, in fact, especially when you're going there to spend huge sums of money, whether a few quid on a parking bay. I suspect it's much more to do with the fact we can go there, park the car, and we're done with that. And we can just wander. And that's one of the things you're trying to do in the city centre. There's so much to enjoy. I mean, I'm perhaps, I don't know if I'm a bit of an outlier. I just like walking around cities. There's so much to see, and one of the things when you encourage people to come again, and one of the things to look at, just look up, look at the buildings, look at the history, go over the place you haven't been before, go down that interesting little alleyway that looks interesting without being dangerous. If we start thinking about our experience of the city on foot, it's good for movement around, but the kind of spaces we create that will be great to move around on foot will just also be increasingly good simply to be in, whether we want to perch, just stop, just have a chat, have a lean on something. And I think, it's how we experience city centres, and how we experience most places is when we're out of however we got there and we're just walking now. So, it's formally the top of our modal priorities and transport terms, but in the city centre, that's writ very large, because it's not just about movement, it's about experience. And that's why we go to city centres ultimately. It's not just for the job or that shop, it's for that experience. And we do that when we're out and about walking. And that's why it's extremely important. So going back to that photograph I showed from the aerial of City Square as it is at the moment, my word, just to get from there up to Park Row, I'm a bit jealous, actually, I should say, Paul. Since I last was coming to an actual meeting, they've done so much on Park Row, which is my walk up to wherever we were meeting, and the hedgerow and stuff like that. I'm really looking forward to see that stuff. And it wasn't great to walk up there. It's quite a narrow canyon-like thing, and you felt you were pushed out to the edges. Now that that's changed, it really invites people to move. And one of the reasons that is, when you're invited to do stuff, you'll do more than you originally thought. You'll come back and do it again. And that's got to be good for the city centre experience, whether it's just about your own well-being of enjoying a place, or whether it's about whether you're spending money and the people on whom you're spending money is their livelihood. So.
Great, thanks, John. But Paul, one of the questions, just touching upon what John said, but one of the questions that's cropped up on a couple of occasions, certainly in other panels, is, how are we making it a city centre that people can move around easily? So if you've got, if you're visually impaired, or you've got some disabilities, or you're young people, safety's cropped up in a number of ways. And is it a safe design? Is it a safe city that we're trying to create? what's your thoughts, and how is the council addressing those important challenges?
Okay, thanks, Nigel. So I think clearly the strategy sets out the principles that we want, to be inclusive for all. We need to make sure that it works for everyone. But then when we get to the scheme detail level, when we're doing the designs of each of the schemes, we do that active consultation with those specific groups. So, I think of an example of the hedgerow scheme and the Cookery Street scheme, where we actually had members of the access and usability group come out with us. This was pre-COVID, and we set out the contractors had set out a palette of materials that we were going to use to demonstrate, if you like, what the curb heights were going to be, and how the colours of the materials contrast for those people who were partially sighted, etc. So we really look at that level of detail and consult with the people who are going to be using it, the experts and the individual users on that, to ensure that we're getting those designs right. So there's an awful lot of work goes into each of those individual schemes, and so I think I would say that's how we do it. And then in terms of safety, obviously as part of any design process, there's something called a safety audit process, which happens at key points through that design. So as an initial feasibility is developed, there's a stage 1 safety audit, and again, that's done independently from the design team, and the design team have to respond to those points that have been made. There's then a second stage when it's all detailed design and about to be ready to be constructed, and then finally a third one when it's being built, that picks up any items that have passed through those 2 checks that we've still not picked up, and then amendments are made by the contractor at that point. So there's a sort of a set process. All the design standards that we use have obviously been through sort of safety standards, etc. So we do, really important to us when we're developing the schemes to get them right, to make them safe. So I understand people see certain things and have certain concerns, but when we are designing things, there are those safeguards in place.
That's great. So we're nearly out of time. We've really just run over, but I think it's important for us just to go around our panelists and give them an opportunity. So I'll come to you last, Paul, but maybe go to you first, Amanda. So we've heard some of the questions. We've seen some of the responses from your fellow panelists. We know we've still got work to do in terms of the detail. I think that's a really good point that's come out. So in terms of our next steps and what you've heard, Amanda, what do you see the future of Leeds City Centre, and are we on a path to transforming it and making it better? Yes,
and I think COVID has probably given us an opportunity to rethink about what we should do in the city centre. As a result, really successful. I think the question about businesses perhaps locating in hubs outside of the city centre, there's an element of truth in that. Some businesses will do that, but there are lots of businesses, my own profession, for example, the legal profession, there is no way we can operate outside of the city centre. It's a huge part of business in Leeds. So it will continue to be vibrant, and if we can develop it from a transport point of view to make it accessible, lots of free spaces, cycling, walking, all the rest of it, as I said on my presentation, everybody will benefit, businesses and individuals.
Thanks, Amanda. That's really good. And John, you've been pretty positive. You've set down a few challenges. Right direction, more to do. We're marking the homework. What is it we should be doing?
Definitely so far so good, I'd say. I mean, I am a glass half full person, so that doesn't help. But I think, as I said, I mean, all right, you stick to that vision, which is why I sort of repeated it twice, to be honest, and reminded ourselves of it in the moment. It's the right vision to have, and kind of whatever you think about that, it's this idea of what is it you're going to do to enable that to happen. Not you've got to do this, Leeds resident. It's well, how do we make that achievable? How is it that we can live in the city and enjoy and want to live in the city in these sorts of ways? And so far so good. As I say, I haven't been able to inspect some of the stuff that Paul was flying around showing us pictures of earlier, but that looks like moves in the right direction. There will be challenges. It's incredibly complex. You won't please everyone, but actually with a vision like that, and bearing in mind also what Paul said really importantly, I think, about access for all. And some other people on the speakers, when we talk about different demographics, young people, people with money, people without, it is a city for all. As I say, one of the things about the public realm is we let anybody use it, but actually sometimes we sort of don't because of the way it's designed. We actually could technically go there, but we know you won't. And actually, in some, I have seen designs which is almost, you could imagine, being exclusive. So if you hold to the vision, and hold to that when you've got all sorts of difficult challenges about, frankly, the court trying to fit into a pint pot. The key thing is, if you have that vision and you're able to resolve those accordingly, as opposed to just backing off, no, put that in the too difficult file. Those moments will arise, that they always do, but they need to be headed on while you keep heading towards that vision of a city where people can live without having to use a car and also can enjoy, and everybody can enjoy that. So I think it is definitely so far so good. I'm always very positive about this. I think there's a terrific opportunity in Leeds and it's heading in the right direction. I don't, and no one is paying me to say that. I just...
Okay. That's good to hear, but you need to keep us on our toes is the answer. And I think the panel, not just the panelists, but I'm looking at the chat and the questions, and certainly the participants are aiming to do the same. So 2 questions then, one for you, Angela, and one for Paul. But Angela, you've got a big responsibility here in terms of your role of asset management and regeneration. How important is it to you that we transform the city centre from a mobility point of view, and that we achieve some of the objectives that Paul's outlined at the start?
Well, it's absolutely critical, and it's not just critical for me, it's critical for our future generation, isn't it? Because we know what we can't do is keep going forward as we have been. But actually, it's about post-COVID. How do we bring our communities back together as we come out of our workspaces, which are usually the spare room if you are lucky enough to have that? How do we come back together? And our city centre is having an enormous role in doing that. And I think for those of you who have been in over the last year, you will see, actually, we've taken the opportunity to accelerate some schemes that would have caused massive disruption. And the city centre will look radically different when you come back, but it is not the end of the journey, and nor will it ever be, because of how complex cities are. But hopefully we can make it more legible and more walkable for those that can, which means there's much more room for people who need different levels of travel as well.
Okay, that's brilliant. And for you, Paul, Finn's answered one of the questions about some of the opportunities for consultation and engagement. There's a number of questions around how we do it, what we're doing, do the people engaged in it understand it, can they properly contribute, so you've mentioned some of the harder to reach groups sometimes, some less well heard parts of our communities. Can you let us know how we can communicate this to the participants, and more importantly, the many thousands or hundreds of thousands of people who are not on this call, which would be very hard to manage. And then what is next in terms of the consultation and development of the strategy for the city centre?
Okay, thanks, Nigel. Yeah, so the consultation's open until the 26th of March. If you've managed to find this, you've probably found the website as well. So it's about spreading that. All these webinars are going to be available to watch again for people who really need to do that. Hope that does help for those people who can't make the certain times. They can still hear what we've had to say about the strategy. Clearly there's an email address that people could write it, and people, if they want to request paper copies of the questionnaires, etc., that can also happen as well. So there's ways people can get in touch. Really encourage as many people as possible to do that, because what we need is a strong mandate to take this strategy forward, or a strong view that we need to change it to, we need to be more ambitious, we've got elements wrong. We need to know what people think so that we can get it right when we publish the final strategy, which we'll be looking to do in the summer time. What we're also going to do alongside that is look at an action plan of actually what are the things we're going to deliver in those first 2 and 3 years. So we've got some there's the headline strategy that we've developed here, but then what are we going to do? Which schemes are we going to implement, and how can we carry on working? And especially in the city centre, how can we carry on working with those partners, bringing in the investment, both from national government, bodies like Network Rail, developers and businesses, so that we can get the most we can out of the investment that's coming into the city and get the right solutions for everyone.
That's great. Thanks, Paul. I mean, in wrapping up, for me, if we don't make it a city that works for everyone, and we don't transform the city centre so it's open to everyone to use in the way that they want to use it, then we've failed. It's not a successful strategy. And I think the commitment that Angela and Paul from the council, with the support of others such as Amanda at the chamber, is really clear. We're trying to do our best to create that type of city centre that's open for everyone. I think one of the things that the COVID pandemic has, I think, demonstrated to many people, we really do need this partnership approach, and we need the support of all of our community and businesses to do that, and to make it a success. I said at the outset we were going to listen to all the questions and chat. We can't answer them all in the time we've got available to us. But we will try and get back to people where they've asked specific questions. And as I pointed out, there are other sessions to follow this one, which might be more appropriate for things like public transport and mass transit. And Finn's just popping those up now. Somebody asked a question about the one on enhancing public transport. It was originally the 11th, and that has now moved. But we're here. You can write to the transport strategy team and email them. And as Paul said, it's really important that you share what you've heard and encourage other people to participate in some way, because we really do genuinely want to hear from everyone. It makes us get a more rounded and balanced strategy, and I think that's really important. So I'd like to thank all the participants for asking us some challenging questions, giving us some strong comments, strong views, which will help shape the strategy. And I'd also like to thank all of our panel members for giving their time and answering some, at times, not easy responses, and things that they have to think about and maybe reflect upon some of the things that we've said today. So thanks to everyone for today, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the 4th of March, when we'll be talking about mass transit, which was a very popular discussion point today and has been in the other webinars. So thank you very much, and hope everyone stays safe. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.